whenever there's a lack of this central kingship, this sort of gang warfare breaks out between the noble houses.
The numbers of dead are probably in the hundreds, I should think, if that. It's a small affair. And after it, Henry VI is still King of England. There is no war. There's a battle, but there's no war. And at the end of the Battle of St. Albans, York is in control.
Absolutely nothing glorious
No.
about any of this. It's just grubby political assassinations.
Hello. In this second and concluding part on the causes of the Wars of the Roses, Henry VI fails in his kingly duties and rival factions gain strength across England. Two houses had emerged, the House of Lancaster, with Henry at its head, and the House of York, with Richard, Duke of York, the main man. The Yorkists were joined by Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, and known as the Kingmaker, though my guests today are sceptical as to his political achievements. Derek Birks and David Pilling return and we discuss the two houses, the rise of York and the faltering Lancasters, and the Kingmaker himself as momentum builds to the street fight that was the Battle of St. Albans in 1455. Plenty more history is on the way, so please do share with friends. But in the meantime, I'll hand you over to me talking with David and Derek on the causes of the Wars of the Roses, Part 2, Lancaster and York. Okay, so can we talk about the two factions here, because it's called the Wars of the Roses. So this is before hostilities break out. But Derek, I detect a certain amount of sympathy for Henry VI there. So do you mind if I give you the House of Lancaster to just give a brief description of, and then that David, you get the House of York, if that's all right. So could you just explain a little bit about why we got the names? And which kind of part of the family tree are we looking at? Because they are related, aren't they?
Oh yeah, they're all related.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we consider that we've mentioned Henry IV, who usurped the throne from Richard II in 1399. This traditionally was used as a date for the beginning of the Wars of the Roses. Absolute rubbish. But it's a point where things happened, and that's where the House of Lancaster gained the throne. So John of Gaunt's son, Henry Bolingbroke, Henry IV, took the throne essentially. Now, when he didn't have do it without a lot of trouble. Actually, he had a few hiccups with it, but let's move on a bit. Everything was fairly okay during Henry V's reign. Partly, I suspect, as David alluded to earlier, that he kind of concentrated the public or the Lord's mind on France rather than England. But there was no challenge to Henry VI when he was born, when he became king, and indeed not for a very long time. It isn't the main line of the House of Lancaster that is the issue in the 1450s. It's the other Lancastrian line of descent through the Beaufort family. This was John of Gaunt's other line of descendants. So Henry Bolingbroke is one whole line of descent from his wife, Blanche of Lancaster, and the other line of descent, the Beaufort line, is via his later wife, earlier mistress, Catherine Swynford. So basically, you've got two Lancastrian lines of descent. Henry VI represents the House of Lancaster, if you like. He is the sitting tenant from 1422 to getting on for 1470, off and on. But it's the other line of descent, the Beaufort line, which actually forms the basis of one of the noble factions in the 1450s. And that's in the person of their descendant at that point, Edmund Beaufort, Duke of Somerset. He becomes a key player in this whole political mess, really. He's favoured by Henry. partly because the Beauforts have been very loyal to the main Lancastrian line. They've always been there to be counted on. And so before Henry VI has a child, when there is no heir of his body for the throne, everyone knows that if he dies without an heir, there must be somebody else who is going to succeed. And Edmund Beaufort is a possibility because he has Lancastrian blood in his veins, if you like. And from Henry's point of view, it's not a bad option because the Beauforts have been loyal. And that's all I need to say probably at this point about Edmund Beaufort. But he's up there, he's in a prominent place in the 1440s and 1450s to take over should he need to.
Okay, so that's the House of Lancaster. Very well explained there. Thank you, David. So the House of York. Now these have got all sorts of interesting characters, and they, I think, spoiler alert: House of York wins. Does it?
Well, do they?
Right. Okay.
All right. Depends.
Okay.
It's funny. My father was from Wigan, and he used to have arguments with people from Yorkshire, and then I'd step in and be the pedantic one and say, actually, it wasn't a war between Yorkshire and Lancashire. So, shucks. Spoil everybody's fun. But
yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad you're there to correct me. But so, House of York. What's the House of York?
So the main man, Henry's main rival is Richard of York, who Derek might have to correct me on the details here. He was orphaned by the age of 4. Yeah. His mother died young, and then his father was executed. Is that Cambridge?
Yes,
Executed
Richard Earl of Cambridge.
Yeah, for a plot against Henry IV. And then he's apparently brought up. He's the last man, really, if you look at his background, who might one day sort of lead a major revolt against the king and the House of Lancaster, because he's actually brought up in quite a sort of Lancastrian environment. He's married off to Cecily Neville, and prior to the Wars of the Roses, the Nevilles are this sort of powerful northern family who've got connections to the royal family. And then he's given a lot of, when he sort of reaches adulthood, he's given a lot of responsibility in France, particularly Normandy, where he's heavily involved in sort of leading the war effort throughout the 1440s. And then in terms of his sort of power base, his brother-in-law is Richard Neville, the Earl of Salisbury, who's the father of the man we call Warwick the Kingmaker.
Yes, we're going to get to him. I'm very interested in him.
And York and his sort of chief supporters, they are increasingly opposed to the man Henry is relying on throughout this old sort of calamitous period of losing France from sort of 1440-ish onward. It's not until about 1460 that York makes his sort of shocking claim to the throne.
So what is his claim? Because that's the way you've explained it very well, but he doesn't seem to have. I'm not hearing many royal connections here.
Right, Derek. What is his precise blood claim to the throne?
Okay, so
tenuous.
Richard is descended from 2 branches of Edward III's children, from Lionel.
Right.
Who is, I think, his second son, and from Edmund, Duke of York, where he gets his name, his title from, who is the 4th son of Edward III. Now, I'm always at pains to try and avoid talking about this because people's eyes tend to glaze over at this point. But suffice to say, he has a claim to the throne. You know, to be honest, Edward III had a hell of a lot of children, and a lot of people had a claim to the throne. So, you know, if you're going to list them all, you're going to be there all day. But yeah, so York, the thing about York, as David said, he plays a prominent part in France in the 1440s at his own personal cost. He ends up being, I think it's something like he's owed about £40,000 or something by the end of it all. And that sort of sits very ill with him. But he is the biggest landowner in England, because he inherits all the Mortimer estates via what is the sort of Lionel line of descent, and he inherits all the lands of the Duke of York from that line of descent. So it's not just that he has a claim, it's that he is very, very wealthy and powerful. And the senior nobleman by the time, after Suffolk dies in 1450. So he has this kind of belief that he should be in a position of extreme importance at court. He should be the right hand of the king. That's his whole mantra, really. So you can sort of see already, hopefully, that on the one hand, you've got Somerset, who Henry VI is kind of thinking might be an ideal sort of right-hand man, and York, who thinks he should be the king's right-hand man. Neither of them is seeking the throne, we should stress, at this point.
Okay. And so David mentioned the Nevilles, and so we have Neville, Duke of Salisbury, and his son is Richard Neville, Duke of Earl of Warwick.
Earl of Warwick. Yeah,
Earl of Salisbury.
Earl of Salisbury.
Yeah, they're both earls. Yeah.
And his son is Earl of Warwick. Okay.
Yeah.
Leaving aside why he doesn't become Earl of Salisbury, do you know the answer to that? Why is the Earl of Warwick then not become the Earl of Salisbury, or was he both? Or
well, his father's still alive.
Oh, yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
How did at that point, when Richard Earl of Salisbury lives to a ripe old age until he gets his head chopped off, his son Richard Neville Earl of Warwick, is probably more powerful than his father through a lot. We won't go into detail, but through advantageous marriage, basically. One of the marriages of the century.
He's quite Machiavellian, isn't he?
Absolutely, yes. I think there's plenty of evidence of that.
I mean, as in the main sort of political pulling. He pulls the strings, isn't he? He's the puppet man. Really,
I don't think so. No, he thinks he pulls the strings. The courts of Europe think he pulls the strings, but I don't think he does. He's certainly Machiavellian. He certainly plots. But I've yet to discover a king that he made who was around for more than about 5 minutes. So the term Kingmaker for me is another thing in the national psyche which should be eradicated if at all possible.
That's how I read Warwick as well. I was reading up on him recently. You get the impression of a man who had a tremendous estimation of his own abilities, and then you look at what he actually does. He's like, nah, you're not. You're not Cardinal Richelieu, mate.
So how things haven't really changed, have they?
No. He's some Dominic Cummings of the 15th century. But...
Yes. Yeah.
I'm very distressed that the board game and Warwick Castle's marketing department are going to be very upset about this.
Oh, well.
But why? Okay, so he's made himself into this sort of kingmaker, but he is up to about 1455. So between 1453 and the sort of comatose situation that Henry VI is in, and 1455, where you get the first battle, what happens? Can I start with Derek?
We need to go to 1450, really.
Right.
1450 is a pivotal year because there's a revolt, Jack Cade's revolt. There's a lot of unrest. The leading ministers of the crown are butchered, including the Duke of Suffolk. So there's kind of a clean sweep at that point, and they sort of reset. And York believes at that point, due to his service that we've said in France and all the rest of it, this is his moment to be the main man. Having said that, he's marginalised. He's totally marginalised. He gets sent to Ireland. He doesn't like that very much. He decides to come back. He raises troops. He goes to London. In other words, if we regard this as an act of treason, most medieval kings would have executed in 1450. If not 1450, when he does it again in 1452, they'd have executed him then. The point that's very important to get across is that York is very isolated. I don't think most of the nobility actually like him very much. He's not very popular. He's very powerful, but he's got all these resources and he's got this good opinion of himself. but hardly any other members of the nobility at all support him before 1453. And even then, it's qualified. Now, we mentioned the Nevilles. And if you don't mind, I'd like to digress slightly, because the Nevilles are not the natural allies of York in itself. It's not sort of in a vacuum. If you've got the two together, they wouldn't attract each other. The reason the Nevilles go for York as their ally is that they are locked in a feud with the Percys, another major northern family. And in 1453, 4, 5, that feud is really kicking off. There are major hostilities. People die. There's fighting.
Because they all have private armies, don't they?
They do.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Percy, the Earl of Northumberland, Henry Percy, can call upon thousands of men. And the Nevilles, similarly, can call upon thousands of men. Essentially, if you have a lot of land, you have a lot of men. That's what it boils down to. So you've got these heavyweights, and that dispute is threatening to spill over into the national politics. Now, leave that in the background and then say, okay, Henry's now going to go into a catatonic state. There is no king to legislate on that problem, to solve it. Somebody's got to intervene and knock heads together. So the Nevilles position themselves with the man most likely to be chosen as protector because he's the senior nobleman, because he has more money and wealth than anybody else, and that's York. So had it not been for their need for a strong ally at the centre of government, the Nevilles would not necessarily have supported York. As I said, he was really isolated before that.
Hello, Ollie here. Please forgive my interruption, but I wanted to let you know that at Aspects of History, we produce a digital magazine featuring articles, interviews, short stories and book reviews of the best historical writing available. Authors featured including Ben Macintyre, Lucy Worsley, Andrew Roberts and plenty more. An annual subscription is available for only $9.99, that's pounds or dollars. Yep, you heard that right. That's 6 issues for under £10 or dollars. Head over to aspectsofhistory.com to subscribe, where you can also gift subscriptions. Now back to the show. Was it Suffolk you mentioned, or Somerset, who was Henry's main advisor at this stage?
At this stage, it's Somerset, I think.
Somerset.
Yeah, Somerset. Yeah.
So, David, why didn't they just go with Somerset rather than York? Because as Derek's explained earlier, I think York is not. I think it was you, David. York wasn't closely linked to Henry VI at this stage.
Well, from what I understand, Suffolk was no more successful in France than Somerset was no more successful in France than Suffolk had been. And he carries a lot of the blame for, there's a very bad defeat in 1450 at a place called Formigny. I think that's one of the last field armies the English have got in France, and that's blown away. And Somerset carries the can for a lot of that. And Derek was talking about the relationship between York and the Nevilles. The Nevilles needed York to back, they needed his backing to defeat the Percys. And when you get into this situation with the lack of central authority, like the king has basically been knocked out for the time, throughout this era, or medieval era, certainly England, whenever there's a lack of this central kingship, this sort of gang warfare breaks out between the noble houses. I mean, as well as the Percy-Neville feud, you've got something called the Bonville-Courtenay feud, which I know nothing about, but it's another turf war between, rival aristocratic houses.
In the southwest.
In the southwest, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And then if you go back to any sort of period of civil warfare or internal warfare in England back to the 13th century, it's all, or the Stephen and Matilda, whenever really, there's no effective king, let alone a king in a catatonic stupor. Then these families, who in an ideal world would all sort of close ranks and sort of say, right, the king's out of action, we need to band together here for the common good. It's just factionalism. They just turn on each other.
It's so fascinating because it does. Listening to you both speak about this, it makes one in awe, really, of Henry V, who was just having just read the recent biography, he's an extraordinarily effective king, and his son is...
Well, for 9 years.
Yes.
What would have
Yeah.
happened if he'd lived another 20 years and he'd had to cope with the resurgence of the French?
Well, I think he would have beaten the French easily, I'm sure.
Of course he would. Yes, he would. Good old Javi.
David, I mean, this isn't a French podcast, David.
No. I just think that, as I said before, I think his brother Bedford, although he lacked the crown, was just as impressive a figure. And I think, I suspect ifs and buts, but if Henry had lived another 15, 20 years, he would have kept things going. And possibly his son would have benefited from having his father around for longer. But I do think that re-triggering the French War, how could you possibly resolve that? The English were never going to conquer France. It's huge. It's not about winning battles. It's how on earth do you occupy and control this massive territory when they don't really want you there? That's
ultimately sadly true. Yes. So the first battle, 1455, is at
St. Albans.
St. Albans, that's it.
Yeah.
Who wants to describe St. Albans?
Derek,
this will be a taster.
I'd love to.
This will be for a taster for the listeners. You see.
All right.
Well, first of all, I mean, St. Albans is often called the first battle of the Wars of the Roses. It's really a very big assassination. It arises out of, I mean, York and the Nevilles are negotiating with the king in the spring of 1455. They want basically the king to get rid of Somerset. I mean, this is not the first time this whole dispute has been going on. Somerset's been put in the Tower and taken out again several times. So they've been arguing about this for a long time. So basically, the king is between a rock and a hard place. Most of his councillors, most of the nobility, except York and the Nevilles, are on his side. Only York and the Nevilles oppose him, but that's a big only, because between them, they are massive. They have enormous resources. So basically, York and the Nevilles are saying to themselves, look, we've talked about this. We've tried to get rid of Somerset by legal means. The king is never going to, even if the king puts him in the Tower today, he's going to take him out again tomorrow and he'll be back in control. So we need to get rid of this guy. We need to get rid of him so that he can't come back. And so the Battle of St. Albans is fought in the streets of St. Albans, and it is a genuine attempt to kill Edmund, Duke of Somerset, and Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland, and anybody else who gets in the way. And that anybody else who gets in the way almost includes King Henry himself, because he is actually wounded during the course of the hostilities. So
is he fighting in the battle?
No, he's just caught up in it, really, because and I should say that if you want an achievement of the Earl of Warwick, this is it. Warwick drives this event. He's the one who breaks through the royal lines into St. Albans. And, as far as Warwick is concerned, Somerset has a target on his back. And the king almost gets, as I say, taken out in the same breath, because Somerset fights to the end. He fights and gets killed. The numbers of dead are probably in the hundreds, I should think, if that. It's a small affair. And after it, Henry VI is still King of England. There is no war. There's a battle, but there's no war. There's nobody trying to become king. Richard, Duke of York, doesn't want to be king at this point. He's just arguing over who is controlling the King's Council. And at the end of the Battle of St. Albans, York is in control. Doesn't last long.
That's beautifully teed up, I think. But David, I just wanted to ask you, and you've written about this. I read your book a while ago now, actually. Henry III and the Montfortians.
Oh, yeah.
And the battles in the period that you write about, and I'll put a link in the show notes. It's very brutal. Is it the same at St Albans? And has warfare changed that much either?
What happens at St Albans reminds me a bit of the Battle of Evesham in
Yes.
1265, because what the royalists were trying to do there was target Simon de Montfort and kill him specifically, and his sort of friends. And what was considered shocking about it is that the laws of chivalry were suspended for the day. And the sort of the top end, the leadership were wiped out, where normally they'd be sort of caught and ransomed. And then this is what happens at St Albans. I think by 1455, political violence had escalated in England. I mean, if you go all the way back to, say, Richard II's time, you've got people being murdered in Parliament. You know, a lot of things happening that would have been unthinkable in the mid 13th century. But yeah, as a military action, St Albans strikes me as a street fight in which the Yorkists basically wanted to grab very specific people and kill them, which is what they did. I think Beaufort, he's actually killed in a pub. It's like, or he tries
either
to,
in or outside the castle.
Yes, he tries to fight his way out of it.
Yeah.
And it just makes me think of like The Sopranos. You know, there's absolutely nothing glorious about any of this. It's just grubby political assassinations.
Yeah.
And then Henry, I think Henry, he gets, as Derek said, he gets hurt, but it's not deliberate. He gets shot with an arrow in the neck.
Yeah.
Nobody's trying to kill him.
No.
The Yorkists, they need him. They need him as a figurehead.
Yes.
So that's like an unfortunate accident. And I think he's, by the time when the Yorkists find him, he's been deserted and he's sort of cowering in a corner somewhere. And I mean, clearly this man, you know, he's not his father, is he? If anything is going to kibosh his reputation as a military leader, than being found cowering in a cellar or wherever they found him, it's not it. I do see similarities. It's just there's something extra sordid about the Wars of the Roses. You know, it's just this round of beheadings that seems to go on forever until only Henry Tudor is left.
Yeah, I think that's true if you lump it all together. But as I said, I think you've got to separate things out because, I mean, St Albans is really nothing like any of the other battles.
No.
Because it's kind of as that Prussian general von Clausewitz that said, it's politics by other means. It's the politics spilling over into violence, and as David said, quite deliberate violence. But after it, there is no war. You know, that Henry is still king.
No, that's true. As Derek says, we tend to lump all this together. I think the next battle is in 1459, so that's 4 years later.
Yeah. And the other thing is, there's a reaction to St Albans in that many of the nobility, Buckingham and others, are horrified at what has happened. And it's one of the reasons, not the only one, but one of the reasons why York loses control during the peace, if you like. He wins that battle in a way, but he loses then control of the country, control of the king, because people are horrified at the lengths he's gone to. And that will lead into what happens next.
He sounds like a thoroughly distasteful chap, actually. But this has been absolutely riveting stuff. So thank you. Would you like to come back to talk about Wars of the Roses Part 1?
Oh yeah, it gets into the real bloody gory stuff now. Yeah,
brilliant. It actually reminds me. I took some friends from work when I worked in IT, and a whole bunch of friends who hadn't studied history or anything like that. We went to watch Richard III at the Globe with who's the actor who's just played Thomas Cromwell?
Oh, Mark Rylance.
Mark Rylance playing Richard III. Absolutely brilliant performance as Richard III. But it's obviously Shakespearean dialogue, so they were a little bit perturbed by that. But I just said it's The Sopranos, and it
Yeah,
really
yeah.
is. It's just sort of gangsters and families fighting amongst each other.
Well, when I always think of that quote from Brian Blessed. He said when they were filming I Claudius, he said he and the rest of the cast couldn't get a grip on the script at all until the director said, "Look, you're mafia. You're just mafia." And they went, "Oh, mafia, right." And then it was all fine from then on.
Exactly. I think it really does help to explain. So this has been wonderful. Thank you both, and listeners, links are in the show notes, and I look forward to the Wars of the Roses Part 1.
No problem.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening. Derek and David will return to discuss the Wars of the Roses over several episodes, so there's much more history to come, including the Vietnam War and Wallis Simpson, Duchess of Windsor. But until then, thank you and good night.